On 5 News Tonight, the PM says she's not going soft on immigration. Junior doctors call off their first strike and claims Britain's failing women with breast cancer. Theresa May says no to a points-based immigration system, a key Leave campaign commitment.
What the British people voted for on the 23rd of June was to bring some control into the movement of people from the European Union into the UK. A points-based system does not give you that control.
Also, junior doctors call off their plans for a 5-day strike next week, citing patient safety concerns. And are we falling behind other countries when it comes to treating breast cancer because we won't pay for the drugs? Also tonight, tackling bullying in Britain's schools.
There's one thing that I think bullies find in the person that they're going to bully, and it's always difference.
Celebrities get behind a new campaign to crack down on bullying. And braconid, anyone? The obscure word that won a British man Scrabble's biggest prize. Welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Danny Sinha. Britain won't use a points-based system to control immigration because it won't work. That's what Theresa May insisted at the G20 summit in China today as the Prime Minister faced growing questions from the other media and other world leaders about what Brexit will actually involve. But there's no new detail about how the government might keep the numbers down, and Leave campaigners say her dismissal of one of their key proposals looks like backsliding. Here's our political editor, Andy Bell.
The World Leaders Club, otherwise known as G20, has a new member. Look to the left of the group and there's Theresa May. Her counterparts are eager to hear from her what the terms of Brexit will be. But frankly, she hasn't told them much. Just one thing has been made clear: there won't be an Australian-style points system to control immigration.
What the British people voted for on the 23rd of June was to bring some control into the movement of people from the European Union into the UK. A points-based system does not give you that control. I want a system where the government is able to decide who comes into the country. I think that's what the British people want. A points-based system means that people come in automatically if they just meet the criteria.
That might be a surprise to the man on her left at last week's cabinet. Boris Johnson campaigned for a system which awarded would-be immigrants points on the basis of age and skills. Now other prominent Leave campaigners are getting worried.
The idea for the last 10 years or so that an Australian-style points system was the way not just to control numbers but also the type of people, namely checking criminal records and all the rest of it. Now, for Mrs May to suddenly say that she doesn't want to have a points-based system looks like backsliding, and I think people are going to be very worried about that.
Theresa May did her best in China to convince everyone Britain was still open for business. But Japan's Prime Minister, for instance, said Brexit could affect companies like Nissan and Honda, which employ tens of thousands in the UK. Here, the ambassador told me, the government has to be careful.
The businesses here, as I said, are enjoying operating in Britain. And if they are to be pushed out, it's not going to be by their choice. It will be a decision that they'll be forced upon.
Theresa May's first international summit is now over, the whole gathering marked by flamboyant celebration. But back home, with so little clear about what Brexit will mean, no one feels really ready to.
Andy, this decision to rule out a points-based system, they're causing quite a stir, isn't it?
Yes, if you remember back in the referendum campaign, a lot of people campaigning for Leave put this points-based system idea as almost part of their manifesto. Now, it's fair to say that Theresa May never did, because if you may remember, she was actually on the Remain side, so she was never signed up to this. But a lot of people who are campaigning to Leave believe this would be part of the new deal, if you like. Well, Theresa May has now well and truly sat on that idea, but the only problem for her is there is no alternative at the moment that we're being told about. There's no detail either from Theresa May in China or from David Davis, the Secretary of State for Brexit, who's done his first statement to the House of Commons this afternoon. We are not being told what the alternative arrangements for controlling immigration from the EU will be. I think that's partly because they haven't worked that out yet, and also because they know it will probably form part of a negotiation to ensure as much access as possible for British companies to the European market.
Andy, thank you very much. The strike by junior doctors that was supposed to start next Monday has been suspended. The British Medical Association says it's taken the decision because of concerns by hospital bosses about patient safety. Well, we can now join our health correspondent, Catherine Jones, who joins me now. What more does the BMA have to say then?
Well, it's a pretty dramatic and swift climb down by the Doctors' Union. You'd have to say it was only last Wednesday that they called these 4 strikes, each 5 days long. That's more than twice as long as the ones that were originally called back in April, those last stoppages we saw. It was due to start next Monday, the first of these strikes. That only gave hospitals 7 working days to prepare. And so just over a couple of hours ago, the leader of the doctors, junior doctors, Ellen McCourt, called off this first strike, and she said in the statement, for the first time in this dispute, NHS England had told us that a service under such pressure cannot cope with the notice period for the industrial action given. Our hospitals are chronically understaffed. Our NHS is desperately underfunded. We have to listen to our colleagues when they tell us that they need more time to keep patients safe.
OK, so next week's strike suspended. What about the other ones, though?
They are still on. This dispute is not over, and so there are strikes in October, November and December. The first one in October is exactly a month away, starting on Wednesday, October the 5th. The BMA says they will call those off too if Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, comes back to the negotiating table and stops the imposition of the contract that they so dispute. The initial response from the Department of Health merely welcoming the fact that this strike is off, calling on the BMA to cancel the other strikes. And that's something else that Jeremy Hunt has just reiterated in the last few moments, I understand.
Catherine, thank you very much. A shop owner has admitted murdering a 15-year-old girl who'd gone to buy a sandwich at his delicatessen in Clydebank. Paige Doherty went into John Leatham's shop on a Saturday in March this year. The judge said he carried out a savage and frenzied attack on her before trying to cover up the North Korea has been condemned for launching 3 ballistic missiles as the G20 summit in China takes place. The country is reported to have fired the rockets more than 600 miles into the sea around Japan. And Marks & Spencer has confirmed it's cutting 525 jobs at its head office in central London. The job losses will include IT and logistics roles, and they're part of a plan to reduce costs. Health officials in Scotland are investigating after a child died and a number of other people fell ill after becoming infected with E. coli. Well, details are still emerging, so let's go straight to the newsroom and speak to Layla Hayes. And Layla, what more do we know?
Well, this relates to an E. coli outbreak in July this year. And what we know is that the child who sadly died was among 20 confirmed cases to be infected. And of those, 11 have received hospital treatment. Well, Health Protection Scotland have been looking into this and their investigation still continues. They say a type of blue cheese is the most likely cause of the outbreak. And this has been linked to a manufacturer in South Lanarkshire called Errington Cheese. Well, Errington Cheese have issued a lengthy statement defending themselves rigorously. They say all samples of the cheese have been tested and they have all tested negative, and they don't understand why they have been implicated. Well, Scotland say no new cases have been identified for a number of weeks, and in spite of the tragedy for the family involved, they believe this outbreak has now been contained.
Layla, thank you very much. Breast cancer patients are being let down because the NHS watchdog is rejecting too many new drugs. That's the claim by campaigners this evening, who say strict rules are leaving Britain lagging behind other nations in treating cancer. Of 10 new drugs that have come onto the market in the last decade, well, they actually have not a single one was approved for the NHS, despite France, Germany and Australia all doing so. Well, earlier, we did speak to Julie Strelly-Jones. She was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 41, and she's worried one drug, Kadcyla, may not be approved for her in the next round of treatment.
Currently, there is no other route for me after this drug because my body has had chemotherapy for over 4 years, and I'm not eligible for trials because of my body's struggling with the chemotherapy. So I would only be able to go for a new innovative drug or a less toxic chemotherapy, which is not available at the moment. It's extremely upsetting to know that there are drugs in other countries that could benefit me, and that is why I've taken the route of fundraising, because I know that with the current system in the Cancer Drugs Fund and the rejection of drugs by NICE, I'm not convinced that there are going to be any new innovative drugs that will be available when I need them. There's no price that you can put on the quality of life and the time that you have with your children and your family and your friends, because it is so precious, and this drug has given me those special moments, and I just hope that there's many, many more.
Well, let's continue with this subject and speak to Dr. Alexandra Filipovic, who's a clinical research fellow at Imperial College London, and also joining us is Sally Greenbrook from the charity Breast Cancer Now. First of all, then, are women being let down?
Thank you for having me here tonight to address this issue. I think it's really important to understand that breast cancer, firstly, is not one disease. Fortunately, today we know, based on molecular profiling, that breast cancer is many, many diseases, and accordingly, we have drugs to treat each and every one of them. And there are many, many new drugs being developed. We're here today to speak about the newly developed drugs that unfortunately haven't been endorsed recently within the NHS. And these new drugs are indeed making a great difference in the lives of breast cancer patients.
In that breath then, Sally, because obviously you work for a charity that looks at cancer and breast cancer now, very much looking at how these drugs are not getting through to the women that need them. Are we falling behind other countries, do you think?
Yes, we are. These drugs are currently available, many of them are currently available in England through the Cancer Drugs Fund, but the Cancer Drugs Fund is currently reassessing all of the drugs that are available through the fund through the process that NICE uses. That's the body that assesses these drugs for use on the NHS. And they're using the same process that they used when they assessed these drugs the first time round, and they rejected them the first time round.
I mean, let's get down to this. Is this all about money?
It is about money. These drugs are really expensive, and as has already been mentioned, these are drugs that are very specific, they're very targeted. We are dealing with types of cancer that we didn't know about 10, 15 years ago. We have types of drugs that we didn't have back when these systems were developed. We need to update the systems.
Dr. Alexandra, do we need to be realistic here, though? Because we know the NHS only has finite resources, don't they?
Certainly, they do have finite resources, and these drugs are expensive. Their cost reflects extremely tedious and complex drug development process, as well as very lengthy clinical trials that are required, often recruiting thousands of patients in order to validate safety and efficacy of these drugs. Therefore, the drugs ultimately are expensive. Also, when we compare pricing of these new drugs, we tend to compare them with the standard of care. Many of the drugs that are a part of our standard of care now have their generic counterparts, which are by definition much cheaper. So there is an unfortunate disparity there between the pricing of those drugs and the new ones.
Do you think this could mean life or death, though, for some women if they don't get these drugs?
I think it is certainly unfortunate that in the past 10 years we haven't endorsed a long line of new drugs that have been made available perhaps in other countries for breast cancer patients. And this is a very common disease. Still, 9,500 patients die of this disease each year in the UK.
Sally, what do you think needs to change then?
We need everyone to come together to reform the system. We need the pharmaceutical companies to set their prices at a realistic level. We need NICE.
That's the key, isn't it? Because they can charge what they like.
Absolutely, that is the key, but it doesn't do them any good if they can't sell their drugs. So if they aren't approved for use on the NHS, they don't make any money from them in the UK, and that's no good for them. They're willing to come to the table on this. We need NICE to reform their system so it can keep up to date with scientific advances. This is happening now in breast cancer. It will happen in years to come in other cancers and in other illnesses as well, in dementia and many other illnesses. We need to fix this problem.
We're really running out of time, but I just wanted to give you a final thought, Dr. Alexandra. I mean, what would you like to see happen?
It is important to understand that these new drugs are truly transforming treatment of not only breast cancer, but other cancers as well. And we are turning cancer into disease that patients will be able to live with as opposed to dying from. So going forwards, I think it is important to maintain open lines of communication within basic research, translational clinical trialists, oncologists who are practicing with NICE, so that we do indeed see many more of these new treatments being approved in the future.
Great to have your thoughts, ladies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
He's in charge of a committee of MPs looking at issues like prostitution and drugs. Now, though, Labour's Keith Vaz is being urged to step down from the role as he faces a possible investigation by a parliamentary sleaze watchdog. It follows reports that he paid for the services of 2 male escorts at his flat and offered to pay for them to use illegal substances. Mr Vaz returned to the Commons as usual today. Simon Viger reports.
Usually, he's more than happy to speak to the media. Not today. Senior Labour backbencher Keith Vaz is accused of paying 2 male escorts. He's instructed his solicitor making counter-allegations of entrapment.
Mr Keith Vaz. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I warmly welcome the Home Secretary to her post?
His question to the Home Secretary this afternoon was not about his personal issues, but they are what most people were thinking about.
Did you know about that incident before you were appointed? It's just a yes or no, I think.
As chairman of the All-Party Home Affairs Select Committee, Keith Vaz has repeatedly made the headlines. Among other things, the committee is currently looking at the laws surrounding prostitution. Some say his position is untenable.
Well, I'm calling for Keith Vaz to stand down while everything's investigated fully. I'm going to be writing to parliamentary standards, and I'm also going to be writing to the Metropolitan Police. I think there could be potentially a criminal investigation.
Keith Vaz is one of Parliament's most high-profile and controversial figures. He resigned as a Labour government minister in 2001 after continued allegations about his links to the billionaire Hinduja brothers and whether he'd fast-tracked a passport application. He denied the claims, but later resigned citing health reasons and was briefly suspended from Parliament. In 2007, his political comeback was assured when he became chairman of the powerful All-Party Home Affairs Select Committee. But in 2009, he was caught up in the expenses scandal. He'd done nothing illegal, but was asked to pay back a 4-figure sum for money he'd claimed on his Westminster flat. The latest allegations are his biggest challenge.
Well, we've seen one side of a story in a Sunday newspaper, and I think if we let the Sunday newspapers to sit as judge and jury on what may or may not have happened in any particular case, that wouldn't be fair. I think it's important that we have a conversation with him to hear his side of the story before expressing any particular view.
His nickname is the Teflon MP. That non-stick quality is now being tested to the limit. Simon Viger, 5 News.
Coming up on 5 News Tonight.
I remember thinking the less of me there was, the less of me there was for them to hurt.
The new campaign to tackle bullying in schools. Plus, what's in a word? Well, quite a lot if you're trying to become the Scrabble World Champion. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. This month, 10 million children will go back to school. More than half of them will be affected by bullying. And the trauma they suffer as a result can stay with them long after they leave the classroom. So a new campaign is being launched today called Back to School to raise awareness of just how damaging bullying can be. And it's seen several high-profile figures talk frankly about their experiences.
I was training at a football club, and one of the other guys said a couple of racist words to me while we were playing, and the coach at the time fortunately kind of heard what was said, asked me what was said. I told him exactly what was said, and he reprimanded the young boy. He told the boy off, and the kid was told to leave the club and not to come back for a number of weeks until he'd learnt his lesson.
There's one thing that I think bullies find in the person that they're going to bully, and it's always difference. They'll find that thing that makes you different, and then they will pick on it and they will break it down and make you feel really bad about it.
The comments on my social media page, it was things like I realised that there was something really wrong when I was writing out like my interests on my page, like in the About Me section, and people would take exactly what I'd written and then just try and like tease me on every aspect of the things that I really like believed in and was passionate about. And I realised that at that point that it was just getting so malicious that I needed to kind of seek help and change it.
I think unfortunately the green-eyed monster set in for a lot of people who I thought were my friends, and life sort of just turned on its head. And I remember thinking I didn't understand why people were treating me this way, and it just started with name calling, with being excluded in the canteen. And I remember thinking the less of me there was, the less of me there was for them to hurt.
And let's speak to Alex Holmes, who's the head of the anti-bullying campaign at the Diana Award, the charity behind the scheme. Good evening to you, Alex.
Good evening.
We can't underestimate, this is such a big time for kids going back to school, because if they're being bullied, you won't want to go back, will you?
Absolutely. This is the week that 10 million children across the UK return to school. And we spend, as young people, 11,000 hours of our life at school. So it's such a crucial time. It's where we make friendships, but it's also something that shapes us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember going back to school. I wasn't bullied, but it's a big deal as it is. So you can imagine it's tenfold, isn't it, if you're having problems?
Absolutely. And the research that we've released today at the Diana Award found that the nation reported that 56% had been bullied at school. So this is something that has a lifelong impact. It's affected their confidence, their self-esteem, and it's not just an issue for our young people.
What about social media? Because it's not just what happens in the classroom, is it? It can go on when you've left the school gate.
Yeah, and we're calling on trained anti-bullying ambassadors because we believe in the power of peer. And when you train young people to stand up for each other, those attitudes will follow them and they will exist not only online but also in the street. So it's a really, really important thing to teach people about how to behave online and offline.
And it is important, isn't it, to address these issues, because those scars can go into people's adulthood, can't they? They can last for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I think this is an issue for us as a society. It affects mental health, it affects future job prospects, and we're calling on parents today watching this to
I was about to say, because parents, they can often feel really helpless. They don't know what to do. Do they ignore it? Do they speak to the school? And what is your advice?
So parents watching this, you've got a really, really important role. Make sure your child knows that if they have a problem, concern or worry, they can come to you. Ask them for 5 people. Who would they go to if they had a problem? And make sure you're aware of your school's anti-bullying policy. Every school has to have one. Make sure you're aware of it and you're familiar. And I think we need to have more trained individuals in schools that can make a real difference and can influence behaviours and attitudes.
So that communication really, really key here.
Absolutely, yeah.
OK, thank you very much. Alex, thank you. Opponents of the growing camp of migrants and refugees in Calais took their frustration to the streets today, staging protests and demonstrations that have caused severe disruption. They want the French government to clear what's become known as the jungle. As the camp grows, lorry drivers claim some people are using increasingly dangerous tactics to try to get to Britain. Julian Drucker reports from Calais.
They decreased their speed so that their message might gain momentum. For these lorry drivers and farmers, this Calais convoy was orchestrated to bring as much disruption as possible. Protesters then set foot on the main route for freight and passengers heading to Britain. It all culminated here, a day of action instigated by the hundreds who say the authorities have failed to tackle the town's migrant camp.
Well, flares have been lit here and there is much noise as all of those lorries slowly pass through. But will any of this protest actually have an effect on the numbers of migrants here in Calais?
Those behind this blockade cite safety fears as their main concern. They claim to have experienced increasing threats from migrants as they attempt to board vehicles.
You see things like daily attacks on the motorway. It's unacceptable. I mean, we live in a republic. It's a free country. You should be able, you and everyone that goes through Calais should be able to travel freely without fear.
And what would you say to those families, British families, stuck in this protest at the moment?
Well, I say we do apologise, of course. We've tried to warn, through the press, the people in England and on the continent.
This was the so-called jungle 6 months ago, before parts of the camp were bulldozed by French authorities. Now it's shrunk in geographical size, but the density of the population is increased dramatically. It's home to an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 migrants. It's divided into 2 main sections, blue tents in which most live, next to the more sturdy containers, both provided by the French government. And outside the official camp, the growing slum areas. Today, the Mayor of Calais, Natasha Bouchart, joined protesters and called on the French government to dismantle the whole perimeter of the jungle. Some here vow to keep blocking the A16 route until ministers commit to a date on which that might happen. But where do those migrants go if they can't stay here? Julian Drucker, 5 News, Calais.
Finally, the British man who won the ultimate war of words. 2 years ago, Brett Smitheram from East London reached the quarterfinals of the World Scrabble Championship. Yesterday, though, he went all the way and won it with a word for a type of wasp. Well, I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Congratulations, Brett. I mean, how does it feel, first of all?
It feels absolutely amazing. It's been a dream since I started playing 20 years ago, and to finally have achieved it in the style I have, I still can't believe it hasn't sunk in.
Let's talk about how you did win it and some of those words that were key to you. Some of them, most of them actually, I haven't heard of.
Yep, that doesn't surprise me.
OK, let's talk us through that then. So, because brachyid was which we've also trailed. I mean, what does that mean? Something to do with a wasp?
So a brachyid is a parasitic wasp. It's not a word I know through general knowledge, but I will have studied words going into this. And in fact, in this game, it scored me 176 points by itself. So pretty influential move.
OK, there were a couple of other. There was another one, wasn't there? I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Periagua, maybe. Periagua was a hollowed-out canoe. That's got a little bit less, 76, but still worth doing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, how do you do this? What do you have to do to prepare yourself? Do you just learn? Do you just swallow up the dictionary, and how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, it's two things. Obviously, it's a word sport, is what I call it. So absolutely, I have to have the weapons of my trade, which are the words.
Do you often know what they mean, or do you just? I mean, how do you do it? Do you learn them, or do you know what they mean, or how?
Usually, I learn them as a list of words without definition.
Really?
But I'm unusual amongst most Scrabble players in that I'm not a mathematician. I'm a linguist. Okay. So I probably about 50%, I would say, I know the meaning of.
OK, but a lot of the time it's kind of random words, I guess.
It can be random words.
Wow.
A previous world champion couldn't really speak English, so that shows how we go about learning. It's not so much language as weapons.
I'm a big fan of Scrabble, often at Christmas, I must admit. It's nice, family game, you play after dinner. Do you think it's got a future, though? Because, in this digital age, do people still like playing it?
People love playing Scrabble, absolutely. We're seeing a huge amount of increase in playing online. I think people are passionate about language generally and their ability. And as I say, it's like a sport. It's like tennis. People can play tennis from the moment they can pick up a racket, and people can play Scrabble from the moment they can speak the language.
Very, very quickly, you want a bit of money out of this. How are you going to celebrate?
I've already bought 2 bottles of champagne, only 2. And now I'm going to take a sabbatical from Scrabble for a couple of months and work out what I'm going to do with the rest of it.
OK, well, we wish you the best of luck. Enjoy your moment, Brett.
Thank you so much.
That's all from us here at 5 News. Sean Welby's got the weather next, and Layla Hayes has the updates throughout the evening, first at 8 and just before 9 from all the team. Thanks very much for watching. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.